In this lesson, the second-year education students will define and develop process-oriented, performance-based assessment. As we go on this topic, the students are also expected to apply the steps or processes in developing a process-oriented, performance-based assessment. These include the learning competencies, designing a task, and creating a scoring rubrics in evaluating outputs of a process-oriented, performance-based assessment to arrive at the final results. Now, these are the learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, the students will be able to identify the learning competencies based on process-oriented performance-based assessment, apply concepts learned by providing timely and accurate feedback to the learner's performance, develop process-oriented performance-based assessment, and create a scoring rubric for process-oriented performance-based assessment.
Good day, everyone. Too often, we tend to assess the students' learning through their outputs or products, or through some kind of traditional testing. However, it is important to assess not only these competencies, but also the processes which the students underwent in order to arrive at these products or outputs. As such, in this video, I'll talk about what is a process-oriented performance-based assessment. So what is a process-oriented performance-based assessment? Well, to formally define what it is concerned with the actual performance rather than the output or product of the activity. This means that it focuses on the actual performance, not on the product or the output at the end of the activity. For example, as you can see in the picture, ballet dancing. So what is the process-oriented here? Well, the process-oriented here is the dancing itself, the actual performance, including how they do the dance or the skills they need in order to execute the dance. That's what we call a process-oriented. Another example is when you bake a cake. Well, what is the process-oriented here? Well, the process-oriented here is the baking itself. Yes, including how they bake, the process, how they bake, and also the skills they need in order to bake a cake. So why do we need to know about this type of performance-based assessment? Well, the importance of this is that assessment is most effective when there's an understanding of their learning, of their students' learning. It entails not only what the students know, but also what they can do on what they know. So just keep in mind that a process-oriented performance-based assessment focuses on the actual performance itself, like dancing, singing, cooking, gardening, and other performance that involves the how and what skills they need in order to perform a performance.
So here are the advantages and disadvantages of process performance-based assessment. So let's have first the advantages. So first, direct observation of student learning. So it is often used to observe students to see if they can perform a particular activity or skill correctly. Second, active students engagement. So wherein the students are actively involved in activities that engage them to develop a deeper understanding of content by collaborating, cooperating, and interacting. Third, higher order thinking skills. So process performance-based assessments from students to use higher order thinking skills such as analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So the more opportunities students are given to practice these skills, the more proficient they become of using them. The fourth is flexibility. So from the word flexibility, so it is mean that all students are flexible to change the strategy, plan, or other aspect that related to their activities. So it can be changed over the time. So the fifth is students' enjoyment. So students find them interesting and engaging. So let's have the disadvantages. So first, it can very time consuming. It takes a lot of time. It's very time consuming to perform. Second is can possibly be costly. Why? Because if you do an activity, you have or you need to have materials for the activity. So obviously you can buy a material for the activity. So third, relies heavily on student initiative and drive. So for example, the teacher asks the students to dance, but there's a, there is there are students that don't like to dance or can't dance. Fourth, relies heavily on specific skills sets of students. So for example, the teacher asks the students to bake, but the students' skills are not fit into a baking. And last, fifth, results can be subjective. So it's hard to evaluate and judge the student learning.
Like any other assessments, there are also steps in developing a process-oriented performance-based assessment. First is determining the learning competencies. Second is designing the task. And third is creating a rubric. Well, let's talk about the first step, determining the learning competencies. But before that, we need to define what is a competency. Well, competencies is defined as groups or clusters of skills or abilities needed for a performance task. This means that these competencies or these abilities or skills are the one we need to observe and put on our objectives. As such, the learning objectives of a process-oriented performance-based assessment are directly stated in the behavior of the students. That is why the objectives focuses on those behavior which exemplify a best practice for the particular task. For example, assume yourself as an English teacher. As what you observe and reflect on the behavior of your students or their skills they need to improve, you come up with a task which is to perform a speech choir. And then, because you have now a task, you need to determine what are your objectives, or what I said earlier, what you observe on the behavior of your students or the skills they need to improve. So first, you need to have a general objective. In this case, the general objectives here is the activity aims to enable the students to perform a speech choir. And then this general objective, you need to break it down to a more specific objective, to a more easily observable behavior. So, in this case, our specific objectives here are the recite the piece from memory without referring to notes. Second is use appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the speech choir. Maintain eye contact with the audience while performing the speech choir. Create the ambience of the speech choir through an appropriate rising and falling intonation. And lastly, pronounce the words clearly and with proper diction. So that's how you create the learning competencies. First, you need to create a task based on what you observe on the behavior of students or what skills they need to improve, and then you have a general objective, then break it down to a more specific objective in order to easily observe to us more specific observable behavior. So in what you observe in our specific objectives, it will also range from simple observable processes to a more complex observable processes. We can say a complex observable processes if it contains two or more skills involved in a specific objective. So in this case, in our example, we have the creating the ambience, the speech choir through appropriate rising and falling intonation. That's the more complex observable behavior. In order to understand furthermore about this simple and complex observable behavior, in this case, the following competencies or objectives are simple observable behaviors or competencies. We have the speak with a well-modulated voice, draw a straight line from one point to another point, color a leaf with a green crayon. As you observe, a simple observable behavior or a simple competencies consists of a one skill in every objectives. So here we have the speak, the draw, and the color only. And in terms of complex observable behavior or the complex competencies, we have the recite a poem with feeling using appropriate voice quality, facial expressions, and hand gestures, construct an equilateral triangle given three non-collinear points, and draw and color a leaf with a green crayon. So in here, we have these competencies are complex because it consists of two skills. So the first one, recite a poem with feeling using appropriate voice quality. So the skills here is to recite with a feeling. So it involves two skills. Second is construct an equilateral triangle given three non-collinear points. So it involves a higher cognitive skills, the constructing or the creating. And lastly, the draw and color a leaf with green crayon. So the skills here is the draw and color. So a complex observable behavior or a complex competencies consists of two or more skills.
So, hello everyone, my name is May Anthorbaso, and today I'm going to discuss the task designing. Okay, so task designing. Perform tasks require the students to construct a response, usually complex in nature. Performance tasks usually emulate actual workplace activities or real-life skill applications and require higher order processing skills. So when designing a task, teachers should always remember that the purpose of the task is to provide opportunities for the students to demonstrate what they have achieved or learned. So not just a simply task para mahulog ang imong oras na ipabuhat nimo sa imong mga estudyante. In a whole week, para di na kanila katulog. It should be demonstration of what they have achieved or learned. Because at the end of the day, my God, our performance tasks are not just simply activities. They are assessment strategies. And the very reason why we implement several assessment strategies in order for us as teachers to know whether our students have learned or not learned. So therefore, it is essential to determine the learning competences to be exhibited by our students. Diba? Then the learning competences will be the basis of the teacher in designing a task. So, with choosing the best assessment task, it is necessary to be guided with the following criteria outlined by Bond 1998. So first, we have the task is authentic and set in realistic context. Example will be oriented towards the world external to the course itself. Okay, then they are worthwhile learning activities in their own rights. They should be interesting towards our students. That's also is important. Then the assessment permits a holistic rather than a fragmented approach. Holistic, it means when you design a task or perform a task, it's not going everything about perform a task and a task. So by that, if you have 3 lessons, mangita ka o performance task or magbuhat ka performance task that align sa imuha tulo ka lessons. Dili kay, okay, lahi sa first, sa second. Okay, the next, the tasks are not repetitive for either students or assessor. They should work as a productive use of time for all those involved. Then the assessment brought students self-assessment. They have the tendency to reflect what they're doing the task, if that is the right or wrong, diba? Then the tasks are sufficiently flexible for students to tailor them to their own needs and interests, meaning the tasks are not standardized. It should be a task that could explore the creative side and individuality. Then, the assessment is not likely to be interpreted by students in a way fundamentally different to that of the designer. That's why it is very important that we need to explain further to our students on what we expect to them. Yes, it's very important. The task did not make assumptions about the subject matter or the learner, which are differently perceived by different groups of students and which are irrelevant to the task.
On task designing, learning tasks need to be carefully planned. In particular, the teacher must ensure that the particular learning process to be observed contributes to the overall understanding of the subject or course. So when you design the task, the most important thing to take note is that the task should be related and aligned to your subject or course. There are some generally accepted standards that will help to guide us in designing a task. First, identifying an activity that would highlight the competencies to be evaluated. For example, reciting a poem, writing an essay, manipulating the microscope, and more. Second, identifying an activity that would entail more or less the same sets of competencies. If an activity would result in too many possible competencies, then the teacher would have difficulty assessing the student's competency on the task. Third, finding a task that would be interesting and enjoyable for the students. Tasks such as writing an essay are often boring and cumbersome for the students. Here is an example of task designing. For example, your task is performing a speech choir. The possible task design is reciting a poem. So the teacher will group the students into 4 and assign each group with a poem for them to read, recite, and present in the class. Each group will be given different poems for them to recite and will be given enough time to practice the task. Through this task, the students will be able to practice, improve, and develop their oral skills, work as a team, and practice confidence.
Good morning everyone, my name is Crisanto Elesna and today I will talk about rubrics. So what is a rubric? A rubric is an assessment tool used to evaluate students' performance against a series of established criteria and goals. It not only makes expectation explicit but also gives students a clear sense of what is expected of them and how these goals can be met. They are a great tools to evaluate teamwork and individual contribution to group tasks. An assessment tool that maps the criteria for assignment completion against standards for success. So what is descriptors? Descriptors are explicit descriptions of what performance and show how the scores is derived and what is expected of the students. Descriptors spell out each levels or gradations of performance for each criterion and describe what performance at a particular level looks like. Why include level of performance? 1. Clear expectation. It is very useful for the students and the teacher if the criteria are identified and communicated prior to completion of the task. Students know what is expected to them and the teachers know what to look for in students' performance. Similarly, students better understand what good or bad performance on a task looks like if the level of performance are identified, particularly if the descriptors for each levels are included. Let's go to number 2. More consistent and objective assessment. In addition to better communicating in teachers' expectation, level of performance permit the teacher to more consistently and objectively distinguish between good and bad performance, or in between superior and mediocre and poor performance when evaluating students' work. Better feedback. Furthermore, identifying specific levels of students' performance allows the teacher to provide more detailed feedback to students. The teacher and the students can more clearly recognize areas that needs improvements. A well-designed rubrics allows teacher to compare a student's performance or product to what it should be rather than to another student's performance or product. Teachers and students using rubric can create a positive atmosphere for evaluation together. That's all. Thank you.
There are two types of scoring rubrics. First, analytic rubrics, and second, holistic rubric.
So, we will going to talk about the definition of the analytic rubric. Analytic rubric, each criterion, like the dimension, the trait, is evaluated separately. So, muna siya ang meaning sa analytic rubric. Explicit combination rules are used to derive a mark. Explicit meaning very clear or complete. So this analytic rubric will be judged separately for each criterion. So analytic rubric is the teachers assess how will the students meet a criterion on a task. So distinguishing between work that effectively meets the criterion and the work does not meet.
So, in continuation with the analytic rubric, I will discuss on how to create analytic rubric since we already know what is analytic rubric, right? So, just a quick review of what is rubric. Rubric is a scoring guide composed of a set of criteria for judging the students' performances that clearly indicates achievement across different levels of competency. The rubric will help the students to know what exact qualities the rubric should have. There are two types of rubric, the analytic and the holistic rubric. But we will be focusing on the first one, which is the analytic rubric, and on how to create analytic rubric. So what is analytic rubric? Analytic rubric is a two-dimensional rubric with rating scale. For performance levels, it displayed in columns, and assessment criteria displayed in rows, as it is a two-dimensional rubric. It breaks down the level of achievements from the lowest to the highest quality of work, or it could be vice versa. The rating scale for performance levels will indicate the degree of proficiency attained in academic work. The teacher may choose analytic rubric with 3 or 4 levels. For 4 levels, we could have needed improvement, satisfactory, very satisfactory, and excellent. Also, the rating scale can include numerical labels such as 5, 3, 2, and 1, as you can see in your screen.
This rating scale for performance levels, as I have said, are displayed in columns, and this is accompanied with points depending on the choice of the teacher. And under the rating scale, as you can see, there are indicators for each performance level. Now let's go to the assessment evaluation criteria, which are displayed in rows. Assessment criteria are simply statements that indicate what must be met or a specific standard on which a judgment of students' performances will be based on. We should also take note that in analytic rubric, each criterion reviews a separate score, and the final score is made up of adding each separate score. In order for us to better contextualize or understand this analytic rubric, I have here one example. The table is an example of analytic rubric for speech 4. As you can see there are 4 evaluative criteria: are choreography and coordination, costume and props, delivery, and the last one is the interpretation. And there are 4 rating scales for performance levels with scoring in columns. This need improvement, which is equivalent to 1 point, satisfactory, which is equivalent to 2 points, very satisfactory, which is equivalent to 3 points, and the last one, excellent, which is equivalent to 5 points. As you can notice, the rating scale for performance level starts from the highest quality of performance to the lowest quality of work, or it might be vice versa.
So in this video, I am giving the advantages of using analytic rubric. So first advantages is gives diagnostic information to teacher. It talks how much they know and don't know about the upcoming topic. Helps to inform the teacher's lesson planning, learning objectives, and identify areas that may need more or less time to spend on. The second advantages is gives formative feedback to students. In these activities, it is typically ungraded or low stakes opportunities to promote and measure students' knowledge and skills. The third advantages is easier to link to instruction than holistic rubrics. Analytic rubrics are more reliable than holistic rubrics. The last advantages of analytic rubric is good for formative assessment, adaptable for summative assessment. If you need an overall score to grading, you can combine the scores in these rubrics by allows you to assess participants' achievements based on a multiple criterion using a single rubrics.
Disadvantages of analytic rubric. First, it takes time to score than holistic rubric because in analytic rubric, you will judge criterion by criterion or part by part to assess the student performance on each criterion. Second, it takes more time to achieve inter-rater reliability than with holistic rubric. Third, challenges of combining the qualitative judgment to a quantitative scale.
So the next rubrics is holistic rubric. What is holistic rubric? From the word holistic, which means pangkabuuhan. Holistic rubric emphasizes on what the learner is able to demonstrate rather than what she or he cannot do. Holistic rubric can save time by minimizing the number of specified criterion. This rubric allows students to assess their overall performance on an activity or assessment based on a single scale using predefined achievement levels. So the teacher judged the performance of the students by single scale with all criterion to be included in the evaluation being considered together. So the score of the students is based on what or which combination description suited of their performance output. So in short, holistic rubric is general way of judgment. Unlike the analytic rubric, the teacher judge the performance of their students by separately for each criterion.
So how to construct a holistic rubrics? So step 1, choose an activity or output based on the objective of the chosen topic. So we can see here that our activity of the chosen topic is speech choir. So yes, here it is. And then next is determine the level of performance. So we could see here the excellence, adequate, the satisfactory, and the needs of improvement. So next step is writing the score, points, or percent. So we use here a score which is in the excellence, we could see the 4, and the adequate, we could 3, satisfactory is 2, and 1 is the needs of improvement. And then next step is the define the description. So we could see here the description of the level of performance, which is this one description for each level of performance. And then lastly is read and analyze again your rubrics to check if it is already okay or you need to make some changes of your rubrics.
So let's go to advantage and disadvantage of holistic rubrics. So first, the advantage of holistic rubrics of one is scoring is faster than with analytic rubrics. Number 2 requires less time to achieve greater reliability. So holistic rubric saves times as it minimizes the numbers of the decisions raters. So di na kaayo ko kung mag-score ta. So that is why holistic rubrics tends to get used when a quick judgment needs to be made. So when assessing a brief homework assignment, it may be sufficient to use holistic rubrics to quickly review the student's work. Number 3 is good for summative assessment. So good summative assessments are typically done at the end of project unit course, semester program, or school year. So that type of rubric is good for summative assessment yun siya, as it gives an overall judgment of performance of a students. So next is the disadvantage of holistic rubrics. So number 1 is single overall information score does not communicate. So in your whole performance, only single score is provided raman gyud siya. That is why it is not easy for us to determine what to improve the student's performance because it does not provide specific feedback unlike sa analytic rubrics. So number 2 is mass idiosyncratic of criteria. Number 3, not useful for formative assessment. So not useful because lack of specific details of criteria. So what can we say when to use a holistic rubric? So holistic rubrics are used best when there is no single correct answer or response and focus is on overall quality, proficiency, or understanding of a specific content as skills. So also holistic is convenient to use when assessing minor assignment or performance.
Hope you've learned a lot. Thank you for listening.